lyrics. Jolly Booba, Bibi Wana, Mambo Mambo. I'll take the sunshine with the rain. Sunbeams on my face as the rain washes my pain. Cause tomorrow's a new dawning. A whole new day's arrived, opportunities to gain. I take the sunshine with the rain. Sunbeams on my face as the rain washes the pain. Cause tomorrow's a new dawning. A whole new day's arrived, I can hear Zion calling. Baby boy, wipe your tears. The sunny days are here. The rainy days have disappeared. Believe that.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. This event presented by Multicultural Arts Victoria as part of the annual Emerge Festival celebrating the annual Refugee Week. This public forum asking, I guess, the big question, where are we up to in the struggle for refugee rights? Subtitled, Are We There Yet? I know we're not in the back of the car, but sometimes it can feel like it. Well, when the Rudd Labor government came to office late last year, I'm sure I wasn't the only one who felt it was a big moment for the country in terms of restoring a sense of hope and a more just Australia. Hope for a more just Australia, signing Kyoto, a formal apology to the stolen generations, the closure of Nauru, the end of children in detention and temporary protection visas. They were big victories for a lot of hard-working advocacy groups, many of whom are here tonight, and several big grown-up moments for the country. In so many ways, I guess it felt like the last federal election was actually a referendum about social change and a greater commitment to social equity and social justice. I guess we were, after all, coming from a fairly low base. But certainly the change of government signalled a significant shift for refugee policy, which is the reason that we're here tonight. So the question, 6 months into this new government's objectives, is are we there yet? Have we achieved a model for a more just Australia for asylum seekers and refugees? Or are we just a boatload away from returning to the dark days of Tampa and the civics? Tonight, 3 esteemed speakers will share their thoughts on whether they think, or where they think we're at in terms of refugee policy, and there'll be time for you to ask questions as well toward the end of the forum. Michelle Foster is a human rights and refugee law specialist and the Director of International Refugee Law Research at the University of Melbourne's Law School. Please make her welcome. Julian Burnside QC has a long-standing commitment to human rights law. He was Senior Counsel for Liberty Victoria in the Tampa litigation and perhaps more colourfully active for the MUA against Patrick Stevedores in the waterfront dispute, famously captured on ABC TV. He's currently President of Liberty Victoria, and Paris Aristotle AM, the Director of the Victorian Foundation for Survivors and Torture. He's held several positions on state and federal government advisory bodies in settlement and human service fields over the past 20 years and been a member of several delegations to the UNHCR. Please now formally make our 3 speakers welcome. This evening there is a range of groups working together in this area: A Just Australia, the National Council of Churches, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre and Researchers for Asylum Seekers. So as we consider the challenges that are still ahead for this movement, this group of people, it is important to note the victories, and they have been significant ones. And it's also important to remember how this change came about. It was because of the determination of many activists and advocacy groups represented here tonight. Every single person who's demonstrated in cities and outside detention centres all over Australia who've kept our often shameful treatment of refugees in the national and international spotlight. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're in for a wonderful discussion, and I look forward to your contributions as well as part of that. So to begin the discussion tonight, Michelle Foster will start our conversation, and Michelle will look at, I guess, a skeleton overview of where we're at in terms of refugee law and where basic human rights come into that. Michelle.
So much, Tracy. I thought that I'd begin by providing a bit of a global context. And I thought it would be useful to begin by placing Australia's refugee program and policies in global context. And in that, I think it's worth remembering that although we're very familiar with the rhetoric that Australia is at risk at any moment of being completely overburdened by the world's refugees, it's important to remember the reality is that 70% of the world's refugees are actually hosted by developing countries. In other words, the world's poorest countries host most of the world's refugees. Refugees generally flee to neighbouring countries and in fact rarely leave their region of origin, certainly their continent, to seek protection. So this explains why it is that it's Pakistan who hosts the highest number of the 9.9 million refugees in the world today. In fact, between them, Pakistan and Iran together host 20% of the world's refugee population. Australia's share of unannounced arrivals, those who often governments are most concerned with, that is asylum seekers who arrive in the country without prior approval, is extremely low, even comparing to other industrialised countries. In 2007, for example, Australia received roughly 4,000 asylum seekers, about 3.5% of the claims of all industrialised countries. And just in case you're thinking that it's not really fair to compare absolute numbers, the UNHCR has recognised that and has a database where it compares numbers of asylum seekers relative to population. So, for example, and even on this measure we're not doing too well either, because, for example, Cyprus receives 39 asylum seekers for each 1,000 inhabitants, Sweden is 15, Switzerland 9, and Australia is 0.8, so less than one asylum seeker per 1,000 people. So even taking into account our offshore program, I think it's accurate to say that our share of the world's refugees is disproportionately low. And it's important to understand at the outset because the reality is that when we invoke regressive policies which seek to deflect our responsibilities, these refugees often become the practical responsibility of other states. And given that our share of the responsibility is already so low, this is obviously a big problem. The second introductory point to note, I think, is that these issues, particularly the debates in Australia regarding the overriding importance of security, border control and sovereignty, are hardly unique to Australia. On the contrary, many countries, even those whose refugee policies are often put forward as quite progressive, such as Canada and many European countries, have introduced or thought about adopting regressive measures. And I'm sorry to say, but in some of these debates, Australia has actually been put forward as providing a model, particularly in regards to things like the Pacific solution, but also mandatory detention and interception policies. So in recent times, Australia's influence has had a negative effect on refugee protection. The fact that our numbers are so low and yet we still continue to claim the need to introduce such policies merely provides ammunition for aggressive policymakers in other countries to argue for similar policies, especially where their refugee intake is vastly higher than our own. So our policies have consequences for the global community, but this is not to start on a really negative note. I think that we can see it as a positive thing because I think it signals that we also have the capacity to adopt policies that are positive and to provide a positive framework for other countries. And in particular, since we have a new government that has claimed and has shown itself to be committed to being a good global citizen, this certainly provides an opportunity for us to fully implement our international obligations and to thereby influence other states to do the same. So that raises the question, what are our international obligations towards refugees? And I think in answering this question, it's useful to distinguish between two questions. The first is to whom do we actually owe protection obligations? So who is the group of people that we should be concerned with? The second is what those protection obligations entail. So how should we treat refugees or other persons in need of protection once they're within our jurisdiction? So beginning with the first issue, many of you may be familiar with the fact that we have a refugee convention, the 1951 Refugee Convention, and this determines who is considered to be a refugee as a matter of international law. But what many people don't realise is that the definition is a lot narrower than the colloquial use of the term refugee. So a refugee is a person who is outside their country of origin and who is unable to return to that country owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for a convention reason. So that is for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion or membership of a particular social group. In other words, a fear of indiscriminate violence or random harm won't constitute persecution. And Australia has implemented this aspect of the Refugee Convention in its domestic law. In other words, it provides that a criterion for a protection visa is that a person is one to whom we do owe obligations under the Convention. The difficulty, though, is that the Refugee Convention is actually not the only international treaty to impose obligations on states to protect people who are at risk of a threat of harm. Rather, there are actually 3 other international treaties that are relevant. The Convention Against Torture prohibits Australia from returning a person where there are substantial grounds for considering that they will be at risk of torture. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights prevents Australia from returning a person to a state in which they're likely to be deprived of the right to life or to be subjected to inhuman, degrading or cruel treatment.